The words came in a breath so soft that only a man trained to detect threats would have caught them. Don't drink that yet. Emrys Colombo's hand froze halfway to the crystal glass, his dark eyes shifting to find a 7-year-old girl standing beside his chair. Her pink dress looked like spring against winter's severity, enormous blue eyes holding urgency that didn't belong on such a young face. The child had approached his table without his security intercepting her, which alone signaled something extraordinary about this moment. The ballroom glittered with 500 of the city's elite beneath chandeliers, casting prismatic light across Italian marble. Emrys had been discussing shipping contracts with international investors when this small interruption materialized. His security detail stood 15 feet away, somehow blind to her approach. The string quartet played Vivaldi near the champagne fountain, while servers circulated with silver trays. Winter pressed against floor-to-ceiling windows, snow falling steadily outside. Ayn had been standing near the dessert table with her sketchbook, when Arabic conversation drifted toward her extraordinary hearing. 4 men in pristine traditional thobes gathered near the ice sculpture, speaking with casual confidence nobody understood their language. Her brain translated automatically, the way it absorbed Mandarin from her mother's co-worker and French from the bakery owner. The words they spoke made her small hands tighten around her pencil with sudden fear. They discussed poison dispersal timing with detachment menus ordering coffee. One mentioned a glass marked with invisible chemical, glowing under specific wavelength from a conspirator's ring. Midnight was chosen as perfect hour when investigation would be complicated by departing guests. The tallest speaker gestured toward a particular server, giving instructions that made Ayn's heart race. She watched that server receive a special tray, tracked his movement toward the central table where the magnificent man in black commanded attention. Her mother had pointed out Emrys Colombo earlier, while refilling water glasses, mentioning he owned half the industrial facilities providing jobs in their district. Aini had sketched his profile in her book, capturing the strong jawline and intelligent eyes. Now those same eyes were reaching for death disguised as celebration. The decision took 3 seconds of a 7-year-old's courage gathering itself into action. Ayn closed her sketchbook, smoothed her pink dress, and walked across expensive carpet with purpose adults would have questioned. She navigated between tables where diamonds caught light, and conversations shaped millions, her small form unremarkable enough that security assumed she belonged to some guest. The path to Emrys felt longer than any she'd walked before. She reached his chair as his fingers touched crystal stem. Ayn leaned close, standing on tiptoes to reach his ear, and delivered her warning in a whisper that carried absolute conviction. The girl saw his hand stop, saw recognition flash across features that rarely showed surprise. His 3 companions continued their conversation about container ships, oblivious to the life-saving moment occurring inches away. Emrys turned his head slightly, his voice low enough only Ayn heard. "Why do you say this?" His Italian leather shoes shifted, body language opening to receive information, while maintaining casual appearance for observers. The girl noticed everything about him in that moment: the expensive watch catching light, the tailored perfection of his suit, the controlled intensity suggesting vast power held under deliberate restraint. She recognized someone who understood danger intimately. "The men by the ice sculpture," Ayn whispered, her words precise despite her age. "They're speaking Arabic about poison in your glass that glows under special light at midnight." She watched his eyes flick toward the group she indicated without moving his head. The tall one told the server with the gold cufflinks which drink to bring you. Her extraordinary auditory gift had caught even the server's name spoken in Arabic. Emrys processed information with the speed that had built his empire from inherited foundation to international force. His grandfather had taught him to recognize genuine warnings versus manipulations, and this child radiated sincerity. The specificity of her details, the language she claimed to understand, the tactical timing of her approach, all suggested truth rather than childish imagination, or planted deception from rival factions. "You understand Arabic?" His question came gently, treating her intelligence with respect adults rarely offered children. Ayn nodded, her blonde hair catching chandelier light. "And Mandarin, French, Russian, Portuguese, German, and Japanese," she whispered matter-of-factly. "I hear them once and know what the words mean." Her eyes held his without fear, waiting to see if he'd dismiss her gift as fantasy. The girl's claim should have sounded absurd, yet Emrys had built success on trusting instincts that others ignored. He reached past the untouched champagne toward his water glass instead, taking a deliberate sip while his mind raced through implications. If assassination attempt was real, the child had just saved his life. If false, he'd lost nothing but champagne. The risk calculation took milliseconds. "What's your name?" Emrys asked, his attention now fully on this small savior in pink. "Ain," she replied softly. "My mom works here tonight serving guests." The information explained her presence, but not her extraordinary intervention. She glanced toward the Arabic speakers again, her expression showing concern. "They mentioned something about making it look like your heart failed from stress." The clinical detail in her whisper confirmed she'd understood complex conversation. Emrys subtly gestured to his head of security, a former intelligence operative named Marcus, who read his employer's signals fluently. The man approached with professional discretion, leaning down as Emrys whispered instructions. Marcus's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened with lethal focus. Within seconds, 2 additional security personnel moved casually toward the ice sculpture, their positioning appearing random to untrained observers. Bailey had been refilling wine glasses at the adjacent table when she noticed her daughter standing beside Emrys Colombo's chair. Panic flashed through her chest, the working mother's fear that her child was causing disruption among powerful people. She started forward with apology already forming on her lips, her blonde ponytail swinging with urgency. The 29-year-old single mother had brought Ain only because her regular caregiver had a family emergency. Emrys saw the approaching woman, noted the resemblance in blonde hair and blue eyes, understood immediately this was Ain's mother. He raised one hand in a gesture that stopped Bailey's anxious approach, his expression reassuring rather than annoyed. The movement carried authority that made the young mother pause mid-step. His smile toward her held warmth that transformed his intimidating presence into something almost gentle. "Your daughter just demonstrated remarkable awareness," Emrys said quietly, as Bailey reached the table, her uniform marking her as staff rather than guest. "I'd like to speak with both of you privately after this matter is resolved." His words confused Bailey, who looked between the powerful businessman and her small daughter. Ain reached for her mother's hand, squeezing it with reassurance beyond her years. Marcus returned to Emrys's side, leaning close to deliver update in tones only his employer heard. The security chief's expression confirmed analysis of the champagne glass, using portable spectrometer hidden in his jacket. Trace amounts of tasteless compound designed to trigger cardiac event in victims with specific genetic markers. The Arabic group was now surrounded by plainclothes security, their exit routes quietly blocked. The gala continued around them, guests oblivious to lethal drama unfolding. Emrys stood with fluid grace that drew every eye at his table, his movement carrying authority that made conversations pause. He placed one hand briefly on Ain's shoulder, a gesture of gratitude observers would interpret as polite attention to a guest's child. His 3 international investors watched with curiosity as he excused himself, promising to return before the keynote speech. The businessman's composure revealed nothing of the assassination attempt, just thwarted by elementary school intuition. "Marcus, ensure our Arabic-speaking friends remain available for conversation," Emrys murmured, as he guided Bailey and Ain toward the private corridor leading to hotel management offices. His security chief nodded, already coordinating with local authorities who would arrive discreetly. The crystalline evidence of poison sat untouched on white linen, catalogued and secured. Winter wind rattled windows as they walked, the storm intensifying outside heated walls. Bailey's heart hammered with confusion and residual fear as she followed Emrys through mahogany doors into a private office overlooking the snow-covered city. The room spoke of old money and established power, leather furniture and oil paintings worth more than she earned in years. Her daughter's small hand remained in hers, warm and steady despite circumstances that should have terrified a 7-year-old. Ain seemed remarkably calm, as though saving lives was ordinary Tuesday evening activity. "Please, sit," Emrys invited, his tone stripping away the formality that defined his public persona. He poured water from crystal pitcher into 3 glasses, offering them with courtesy that surprised Bailey. The young mother had served hundreds of wealthy patrons, seen how they treated staff like furniture. This man who commanded empires was treating her daughter like honored guest. She accepted the water with trembling fingers. Emrys settled into the chair across from them, his expensive suit somehow making the formal furniture look casual. "Ain, you said you understand multiple languages after hearing them once?" His question carried genuine curiosity, rather than skepticism. The girl nodded, sipping her water with both hands wrapped around the glass. "When did you first notice this ability?" He spoke directly to the child, respecting her intelligence. "When I was 4, Ain replied, her voice clear and confident. "The grocery store owner spoke Korean to his wife, and I suddenly knew what they were saying about fresh produce deliveries. She set down her glass carefully, her enormous eyes meeting Emrys's without hesitation. Mom thought I was making it up until the owner confirmed I'd repeated his words correctly. Bailey nodded, remembering her shock when the elderly Korean couple had stared at her daughter with amazement. The ability had manifested randomly, unpredictably, like synapses firing in patterns neuroscience couldn't explain. Ain absorbed languages the way most children absorbed songs, effortlessly and permanently. Her elementary school teachers had tested her with recordings of Swahili, Hindi, and Turkish. The 7-year-old had comprehended them all within minutes, her brain processing linguistic structures at speeds that baffled educational psychologists. Universities had requested to study her. Offers Bailey had declined to protect her daughter's childhood. And your hearing allows you to isolate conversations in crowded spaces? Emrys continued his gentle interrogation, piecing together the full scope of Ain's gift. The girl nodded again, explaining how she could focus on specific voices like tuning a radio to particular frequency. The ballroom's acoustic chaos that overwhelmed most people became a layered symphony she navigated with precision. She'd heard the Arabic speakers clearly despite orchestra and 300 simultaneous conversations. Bailey watched this exchange with growing understanding of what her daughter had done. The champagne glass, the warning, the specific details about poison and timing. Ain had intercepted an assassination plot through linguistic superpower and childlike courage. The young mother's hands tightened in her lap, pride and terror warring in her chest. Her baby had walked into danger to save a stranger's life. The thought made her simultaneously want to hug Ain and never let her leave home again. "You were very brave," Emrys told Ain, his voice carrying weight of someone who understood courage's true cost. Most adults would have dismissed what they heard, or been too frightened to act. He leaned forward slightly, his expression serious. "You saved my life tonight. That's not something I take lightly or forget easily." The sincerity in his tone made Bailey's eyes sting with unexpected tears. This powerful man was honoring her daughter's heroism. A soft knock interrupted the moment before Marcus entered, carrying a tablet displaying security footage and analysis reports. He glanced at Bailey and Ain, then at his employer with silent question about discussing sensitive matters in their presence. Emrys nodded permission, trusting the woman and child who'd already proven themselves allies. Marcus began briefing on the captured assassination team, their European corporate backing, and the industrial espionage motivations behind the murder attempt. The Arabic speakers weren't terrorists or traditional criminals, but corporate mercenaries hired by a rival conglomerate attempting hostile takeover of Emrys's manufacturing empire. Eliminating him during the high-profile gala would have created chaos in leadership succession, allowing competitors to acquire controlling interest in his companies. The poison was sophisticated, designed to mimic natural cardiac arrest in men with Emrys's specific genetic profile. They'd been planning this for 6 months. Ain listened to Marcus's report with focused attention that made her seem far older than 7. She processed information about corporate warfare and assassination mechanics the way other children absorbed fairy tales. Bailey noticed her daughter's unusual maturity, the way Ain's mind worked through complex problems. The gift of languages came packaged with heightened perception and analytical thinking. Her child saw patterns adults missed, understood implications beyond her years. "The authorities will handle prosecution," Marcus concluded, his tablet showing images of the 4 men now in custody. "Their employer's identity is still being traced through shell corporations and offshore accounts." He looked at Ain with unmistakable respect. The spectrometer confirmed compound concentration sufficient for fatality within 2 hours. "Your warning prevented catastrophic outcome." The security chief's military bearing softened slightly when addressing the small girl who'd outperformed his entire team. Emrys stood, moving to the window where snow fell in thick curtains against the glass. The city sprawled below, lights fighting through the winter storm. His industrial facilities scattered across multiple districts. Hundreds of families depended on the empire his grandfather had built from nothing, the legitimate businesses that provided employment and economic stability. Tonight, a 7-year-old's extraordinary gift had preserved all of it. The weight of that debt settled on his shoulders. He turned back to face Bailey and Ain, his expression thoughtful. "I'd like to offer you both something more than simple gratitude." Emrys's words carried careful consideration. "Your daughter's abilities are remarkable, and tonight proved they have practical applications beyond academic interest." He saw Bailey tense protectively, immediately understanding her maternal fear. "Nothing dangerous," he assured quickly. "I'm thinking of opportunity, not exploitation." Bailey's instinct was to refuse whatever he offered, to protect Ain from becoming tool or curiosity for the wealthy. But she also recognized the genuine respect in Emrys's eyes when he looked at her daughter, the way he'd spoken to Ain as equal rather than child. This man understood value and rarity. He wouldn't waste or damage something he recognized as precious. The young mother's financial struggles whispered seductively about security, while her protective heart demanded caution. "What kind of opportunity?" Bailey asked, her voice steady despite internal conflict. She kept her hand on Ain's shoulder, grounding herself in the physical reality of her child's presence. The office felt warm after hours working the cold ballroom, her feet aching in the required heels. Her entire paycheck from tonight's event would barely cover this week's groceries and heating bill. The contrast between her world and Emrys's couldn't be starker. Emrys returned to his chair, the leather creaking softly as he settled with the controlled grace of someone who'd learned to command space without dominating it. "My grandfather established educational trusts across 7 countries before he died," he began, his voice carrying the warmth of genuine memory. He believed exceptional minds deserved cultivation regardless of their family's financial circumstances. The businessman's eyes held distant fondness for the man who'd shaped his values. "I've continued that tradition through foundations that identify and support remarkable young people." Bailey listened with cautious hope blooming in her chest, the kind that felt dangerous after years of disappointment. She'd applied for scholarships, grants, special programs for Ain's linguistic gifts, only to face waitlists and rejections. Educational opportunities required resources she couldn't provide on a server's income. The specialized instruction Ain needed cost more than Bailey earned in 6 months. She'd been saving $18 weekly in a coffee can, a laughable attempt at building her daughter's future. Ain would qualify for full scholarship to the Metropolitan Linguistic Academy, Emrys continued, naming the prestigious institution that had tested her daughter and deemed the tuition beyond their reach. They have programs specifically designed for children with extraordinary language acquisition abilities. He pulled a business card from his jacket, placing it on the table between them. The foundation covers tuition, materials, and provides stipend for associated costs. Your only responsibility would be getting her to classes. The offer hung in air between them, too generous to be real, too perfectly aligned with Bailey's desperate prayers to trust completely. Ain squeezed her mother's hand, her young face showing excitement tempered by awareness of adult complications. The 7-year-old had heard her mother crying quietly over bills, understood their financial precarity with the sharp perception that accompanied her other gifts. This opportunity represented transformation of their entire existence. "Why?" Bailey asked bluntly, her working-class directness cutting through polite deflection. "You don't know us. Ain saved your life, yes, but this seems like more than proportional gratitude." She needed to understand his motivation, to identify the hidden costs that always accompanied charity from the wealthy. Her experience serving the elite had taught her that nothing came without strings, without expectations that eventually strangled recipients. Emrys appreciated her skepticism, the protective instinct that refused to accept gifts without examining them for poison. "Because waste offends me," he answered with equal directness. "Your daughter has abilities that appear perhaps once in a generation. Letting them atrophy because of economic circumstances would be criminal negligence of human potential." His intensity suggested this was principle rather than sentiment. "My grandfather pulled himself from poverty through education someone else funded. I honor his memory by creating those same opportunities." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "There are no strings attached to the scholarship beyond Ain maintaining reasonable academic progress. You're not obligated to work for me, to provide services, or to feel indebted." Emrys's voice carried conviction of someone stating simple facts. "The foundation operates independently with trustees who ensure funds serve their intended purpose. I'm simply connecting you to resources that already exist for exactly this situation." Bailey wanted to believe him, wanted to trust the sincerity in those dark eyes that had assessed her daughter with respect rather than calculation. She'd been disappointed before, had trusted promises that evaporated when convenient. But she also recognized that refusing this opportunity because of her own cynicism would punish Ain for Bailey's past hurts. Her daughter deserved better than her mother's defensive wounds dictating her future. The decision required courage that felt harder than any physical danger. "I'd need to review the Foundation's documentation," Bailey said carefully, her server's uniform suddenly feeling like costume from different life. "Understand the terms completely before committing Ain to anything." She saw approval flash across Emrys's features, recognition that she was protecting her child appropriately. His respect for her maternal diligence mattered more than she wanted to admit. This man who commanded empires was treating her like equal in the negotiation. Marcus can provide complete foundation materials tonight, Emrys agreed immediately, gesturing to his security chief. Legal documents, tax filings, testimonials from current scholarship recipients and their families. You'll have everything needed to make informed decision. He stood again, this time extending his hand to Bailey in gesture of partnership rather than dismissal. Take whatever time you need. The scholarship will remain available regardless of how long your review takes. Bailey shook his hand, feeling the strength in his grip and the calluses that suggested he did more than sign documents. This wasn't soft businessman who'd inherited wealth and forgotten labor's reality. Emrys carried himself like someone who'd built things with his own hands, who understood sweat equity and sacrifice. The connection between them sparked with unexpected electricity, professional respect bleeding into something more personal that Bailey immediately tried to ignore. Ain watched the adults with her extraordinary perceptiveness, noticing the way her mother's breathing changed when Emrys stood close, the subtle shift in his posture when Bailey spoke. The 7-year-old had heard enough romantic conversations in enough languages to recognize attraction when it manifested. She filed the observation away with her usual discretion, understanding that adults needed time to recognize what children saw immediately. Her mom deserved happiness beyond exhaustion and struggle. A commotion in the hallway interrupted the charged moment, as raised voices filtered through the mahogany door. Marcus moved with fluid efficiency, his hand automatically shifting to weapon concealed beneath his jacket. Emrys's expression hardened into the dangerous mask Bailey suspected was his true face when threats emerged. The businessman gestured for them to stay back, his protective instinct extending to mother and daughter, without conscious thought. Marcus opened the door to reveal hotel security restraining a well-dressed man in his 50s, who was demanding access to Emrys Colombo. The agitated individual spoke rapid-fire Mandarin peppered with English profanity, his expensive suit disheveled from struggle with guards. His face was flushed with alcohol and agitation, his movements uncoordinated. Bailey recognized him from the gala as one of the international investors who'd been sitting at Emrys's table. Mr. Chen, Emrys said coolly, his voice cutting through the chaos with authority that made everyone freeze. I believe we concluded our business discussion before I excused myself. The temperature in the hallway seemed to drop despite the building's heating. Chen stopped struggling, his attention snapping to Emrys with focus that suggested the alcohol was performance rather than genuine intoxication. The shift was subtle, but unmistakable. Ain's extraordinary hearing caught Chen's muttered Mandarin phrases that hotel security couldn't understand. Her small face went pale as she processed words about secondary plans and alternative timelines. The girl tugged her mother's hand urgently, her whispered translation making Bailey's blood freeze. Mom, he's saying the poison was just the first attempt. He's talking about explosives in the parking structure timed for midnight when everyone leaves. Emrys caught Ain's whispered warning through his own acute awareness, years of navigating danger having sharpened every sense. His eyes locked with the 7-year-old's, seeing confirmation in her frightened expression. Chen's agitation wasn't drunken scene, but distraction, calculated performance designed to occupy Emrys while secondary team executed backup plan. The businessman's mind raced through implications, calculating response time needed to evacuate 500 guests without triggering panic that would accelerate any detonation timeline. Marcus was already moving before Emrys spoke, his security training recognizing the shift in his employer's demeanor. Parking structure. Possible explosive device. Immediate sweep required, Emrys said quietly, his voice carrying deadly calm. The security chief spoke rapidly into his concealed microphone, coordinating with his team and local authorities. Chen's face went slack with shock, his performance crumbling as he realized his Mandarin conversations had been understood and reported. The hotel's operations center transformed into command hub within minutes, multiple screens displaying parking structure from every angle, while bomb squad specialists coordinated with Marcus's security team. Emrys stood at the center of controlled chaos, issuing directives with precision that revealed training beyond business school curriculum. Bailey watched him orchestrate the emergency response, seeing layers beneath the corporate exterior that suggested military or intelligence background. The man who'd offered her daughter scholarships commanded tactical operations like seasoned field operative. Ain sat in the corner with her sketchbook, drawing the faces she'd seen near the Arabic group earlier, her photographic memory recreating features with unsettling accuracy. Each portrait emerged in pencil strokes that captured not just appearance but essence, the subtle markers of deception and intent. Marcus examined her drawings with professional appreciation, already transmitting images to facial recognition databases. The 7-year-old's artistic gift combined with her linguistic abilities created intelligence asset that would make agencies salivate. Bailey's maternal instinct screamed to remove Ain from this environment, to flee back to their modest apartment where dangers were ordinary rather than explosive. But hotel lockdown had sealed all exits pending bomb squad clearance. 500 guests contained in ballroom, unaware of lethal machinery potentially ticking beneath their expensive vehicles. The young mother pulled her daughter close, feeling small heartbeat against her ribs, grounding herself in the physical proof of what mattered most. "The devices are confirmed," Marcus reported, his voice tight with controlled urgency. 3 separate packages attached to structural supports, sophisticated timers synchronized to detonate at 12:15. The parking structure would collapse during peak exodus, crushing hundreds and creating casualties that would dominate international headlines. Chen's investment firm had apparently bet heavily on Emrys's corporate collapse, standing to profit billions from the orchestrated tragedy. Emrys's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the only visible sign of fury coursing through his veins. His grandfather had built this empire providing honest employment and quality products, had treated workers like family rather than expendable resources. Now faceless investors viewed mass murder as acceptable business strategy, reducing human lives to financial projections. The attempted assassination he could understand as targeted elimination, but this wholesale slaughter revealed depravity that demanded consequences beyond legal prosecution. Evacuation protocol requires 40 minutes minimum for safe dispersal of guests, Marcus continued, consulting with hotel management on secure exit routes. Bomb squad needs 60 minutes to render devices safe given their complexity. The math was brutally simple. They had 90 minutes until midnight detonation, with 150 minutes of necessary work. Someone would need to buy time, and the options for how narrowed uncomfortably toward impossible choices. Bailey listened to tactical discussion with growing horror, understanding that her mundane evening serving champagne had devolved into life-threatening crisis. She thought about the other servers, the kitchen staff, the musicians still playing Vivaldi, unaware that corporate vengeance plotted their destruction. These were her co-workers, people who scraped by on wages and tips, who had families waiting at home. The class divide that usually protected wealthy from consequence had inverted, trapping everyone equally. "Can we jam the detonation signal?" Emrys asked, his mind racing through technical solutions. Marcus shook his head grimly, explaining the devices used hardwired timers specifically to prevent electronic countermeasures. Whoever designed this operation had anticipated every standard defense protocol. The level of sophistication suggested state-sponsored resources funneled through corporate cutouts, industrial espionage elevated to asymmetric warfare. Ain's small voice cut through the adult tension. The tall Arabic man mentioned something about manual override code. Every head swiveled toward her, the child suddenly holding information that could shift impossible equation. She closed her eyes, her extraordinary memory replaying the conversation verbatim. "He said the one who plants them knows the disarm sequence in case plans change." Her eyes opened, enormous and worried. He also said they'd never share codes because dead men can't compromise operations. The implication hung heavy in climate-controlled air. One of the Arabic conspirators currently in custody possessed the knowledge to disarm the devices, but extracting that information presented ethical and legal complications. Emrys had built his reputation on conducting business within civilized boundaries his grandfather established, refusing to employ torture or coercion regardless of potential gains. Now that moral framework collided with hundreds of innocent lives hanging in the balance. Marcus understood his employer's internal conflict, having navigated similar moral quandaries during his intelligence career. Legal interrogation techniques are time-intensive and unreliable under pressure, he observed neutrally, leaving the decision's weight entirely on Emrys's shoulders. The security chief had methods that produced faster results, but employing them would compromise the ethical foundation everything else was built upon. Some lines, once crossed, redrew the entire map of who you were. Bailey watched Emrys wrestle with impossible choice, saw the humanity beneath his powerful exterior struggling against pragmatic calculations. She recognized this moment's significance, understood he was deciding what kind of man he'd be when civilization's veneer cracked. Her respect for him deepened when his expression hardened with resolve that chose the difficult path. "We do this the right way," Emrys stated firmly. "Find leverage that doesn't require becoming what we're fighting against." Chen's financial records show family connections, Marcus offered, pulling up files on his tablet. Wife, 2 adult children, elderly parents in Shanghai, all dependent on his legitimate business interests. The security chief's suggestion was clear. Threaten what Chen valued more than ideology or employer loyalty. Financial and social destruction could be more persuasive than physical coercion, and infinitely more reversible if intelligence proved false. The approach preserved moral boundaries while applying necessary pressure. Emrys nodded approval, already composing the message that would be delivered to Chen in holding cell. The threat would be precise and credible. Cooperate or watch everything built across generations evaporate through asset seizure and criminal conspiracy charges. Chen's children would lose their university positions. His wife's social standing would crumble. His parents' comfortable retirement would vanish. The businessman in Emrys understood leverage points that transcended physical intimidation. 20 minutes later, Chen provided the disarm codes with the defeated posture of someone watching their world collapse. Marcus relayed the 12-digit sequences to bomb squad specialists who began the delicate work of rendering devices inert. The operations center held collective breath as first device was accessed, everyone conscious that wrong code would trigger immediate detonation. When the timer display went dark without explosion, the relief was palpable, but temporary with 2 devices remaining. Bailey held Ain throughout the tense process, whispering reassurances she didn't entirely believe, while her daughter's small body pressed against hers. The girl had been remarkably brave, but Bailey could feel tremors running through Ain's frame, the delayed reaction as adrenaline metabolized into fear. She stroked her daughter's blonde hair, humming softly the lullaby that had soothed nightmares since infancy. Even extraordinary children needed ordinary comfort when the world revealed its dangerous edges. The second and third devices were successfully disarmed within the hour, Bomb Squad confirming the structures were safe for occupation. The operations center erupted in controlled celebration, professional relief expressed through handshakes and quiet congratulations. Marcus coordinated with authorities on evidence preservation, while hotel management began crafting the statement that would explain the evening's disruptions without triggering mass panic. The official story would involve gas leak detection and precautionary measures, rather than assassination plots. Emrys moved to where Bailey sat with Ain, lowering himself to the child's eye level with the grace that characterized all his movements. "You saved many lives tonight," he told the girl seriously, his voice carrying the weight of absolute sincerity. "Not just mine, but hundreds of people who will go home safely because you paid attention and had courage to speak." His hand rested briefly on Ain's shoulder, the gesture conveying respect between equals rather than adult patronizing child. Ain's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back, the enormity of the evening finally overwhelming her mature composure. She'd understood the Arabic conversations about death and destruction, had processed the reality of explosives designed to kill indiscriminately. The burden of that knowledge sat heavy on shoulders too young to carry such weight. Emrys saw the moment her brave facade cracked, recognized the child beneath the extraordinary abilities. "It's all right to be scared," he said gently, his own childhood memories of violence surfacing unexpectedly. "Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite being terrified." He'd been 10 when his grandfather had explained this truth, standing in the ruins of a factory burned by competitors. The lesson had shaped everything that followed, teaching him that fear was information rather than limitation. Now he offered that same wisdom to a 7-year-old, who just learned how cruel adults could be. The ballroom gradually emptied as guests departed through verified safe exits, their evening's glamour unmarred by knowledge of how close catastrophe had approached. Emrys watched from the operations center as limousines collected the oblivious elite, their conversations likely focused on business deals and social connections rather than the violence that had stalked them. The dichotomy between their ignorance and his awareness created strange isolation, the loneliness of carrying burdens others would never comprehend. Bailey's shift supervisor had released her given the emergency circumstances, offering awkward apology for the disrupted evening, as though gas leaks were somehow management's fault. The young mother accepted her pay envelope with numb fingers, her mind still processing the surreal transition from serving champagne to witnessing counterterrorism operations. She stood uncertainly in the ornate hallway, Ain's hand in hers, unsure whether they were dismissed or still somehow entangled in Emrys's complicated world. Marcus appeared with the foundation materials as promised, a leather portfolio containing documentation that would determine Ain's educational future. "Mr. Colombo requests you and your daughter join him for late dinner once the authorities complete their interviews." the security chief said formally, his military bearing softening slightly. He understands if you'd prefer to go home, but he'd appreciate the opportunity to properly thank you both. The invitation carried no pressure, genuine option rather than veiled command. Bailey's exhaustion warred with curiosity about the man who'd treated her daughter like valued consultant, rather than lucky accident. Her practical side screamed to leave, to return to familiar poverty's safety, rather than navigating the complex world Emrys inhabited. But something in his eyes when he'd knelt before Ain, the vulnerability beneath his controlled exterior, called to parts of Bailey she'd thought permanently dormant. Against her better judgment, she agreed to stay. The hotel's private dining room offered intimate luxury, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the winter storm that had intensified into near whiteout conditions. Emrys had changed from his gala attire into charcoal sweater and dark jeans, the casual clothing somehow making him more rather than less intimidating. He'd arranged child-friendly menu options for Ain alongside more sophisticated fare, the thoughtfulness revealing attention to detail that extended beyond business negotiations. Ain attacked her pasta with enthusiasm that reminded everyone she was still just 7, despite the evening's extraordinary events. Bailey watched her daughter twirl noodles with single-minded focus, grateful for this return to normalcy. The girl's ability to compartmentalize trauma and joy was either remarkably healthy or concerning. Bailey couldn't determine which. She made mental note to schedule counseling sessions regardless of whether they could afford them. "Tell me about yourself," Emrys invited Bailey, his attention focused entirely on her in a way that made her intensely self-conscious. Beyond being exceptional mother to remarkable daughter, who is Bailey? The question caught her off guard, too personal and genuine for the context. She'd expected polite small talk or business discussion, not sincere interest in her identity separate from maternal role. She found herself talking about the dreams she'd deferred when Ain arrived, the art history degree abandoned halfway through when pregnancy and single motherhood redefined her priorities. Bailey described the small watercolors she painted late at night when exhaustion permitted, the way she saw the world in color relationships and compositional balance. Speaking about her abandoned aspirations felt indulgent and painful simultaneously, like probing a wound that had scarred over. Emrys listened with the complete attention he'd given the evening's crisis management, his questions drawing out details about her artistic influences and favorite periods. He mentioned his private collection focusing on 20th century Italian painters, casually noting pieces that would make any art historian's pulse race. The conversation flowed naturally despite their vastly different circumstances, finding common ground in appreciation for beauty and craftsmanship. "My grandfather believed wealth's true purpose was creating opportunities for others to flourish," Emrys said, swirling wine in crystal glass. He'd escaped poverty through a teacher who recognized his potential and funded his education. The story emerged gradually, revealing the foundation of Emrys's current philosophy. "Everything I have exists because someone invested in human potential, rather than dismissing it based on economic circumstances. The scholarships are repaying that debt across generations." Bailey understood she was receiving the answer to her earlier skepticism, the genuine motivation behind his generosity toward Ain. His wealth carried responsibility rather than entitlement, obligation to extend the same chances he'd received. The realization shifted her perception of him fundamentally, seeing past the intimidating power to the values that guided its application. Emrys wasn't rescuing them from charity's condescension, but recognizing Ain's worth and acting accordingly. The conversation drifted to lighter topics as Ain finished her meal, the girl's yawns becoming more frequent despite her attempts to remain alert. Bailey felt similar exhaustion pulling at her consciousness, adrenaline crash leaving her limbs heavy and thoughts sluggish. Emrys noticed their fatigue with the same perceptiveness that characterized his business acumen, immediately arranging hotel suite for them rather than sending them home in dangerous weather conditions. "The storms intensified beyond safe driving," he explained, gesturing toward windows where snow fell so thick, visibility had vanished entirely. "The presidential suite is available and already prepared." Before Bailey could protest the expense, he added, "The hotel comps it for situations exactly like this. You'd be doing management a favor by occupying it." The diplomatic fiction allowed her to accept without feeling like charity case. Marcus escorted them to accommodations that redefined Bailey's understanding of luxury. Rooms larger than her entire apartment with marble bathrooms and Egyptian cotton linens. Ain's eyes went wide at the opulence, her exhaustion temporarily forgotten in wonder at the space. The girl explored every corner while Bailey stood frozen in the doorway, overwhelmed by the contrast between this gilded cage and her modest reality. Emrys appeared briefly to ensure they had everything needed, his presence somehow making the excessive space feel less intimidating. "Tomorrow we'll discuss the scholarship details properly," he said, lingering in the doorway with unexpected reluctance. "Tonight, just rest and let someone else handle the complications." His eyes held Bailey's for a moment that stretched beyond professional courtesy, recognition passing between them that neither was ready to name. After he left, Bailey helped Ain into borrowed pajamas provided by hotel staff, tucking her daughter into bed that could have slept 4 adults comfortably. The girl was asleep within seconds, her breathing evening into peaceful rhythm. Bailey stood watching her child's innocent face, processing how drastically their lives had shifted in single evening. The scholarship, the connection with Emrys, the violence barely avoided. It felt like crossing threshold into different existence entirely. She moved to the window, watching snow accumulate on streets below, the city transformed into monochrome landscape. Her reflection stared back from glass, blonde hair disheveled and uniform rumpled, looking every year of her 29, and then some. Behind that tired reflection stood the ghost of who she'd been before responsibilities consumed dreams, the art student who'd believed talent might be enough. Maybe Ain's opportunities would include space for Bailey's deferred ambitions to resurrect. Her phone buzzed with text from numbers she didn't recognize. "Sleep well. Tomorrow we'll figure out next steps together. Emrys." The message was simultaneously professional and intimate, appropriate boundaries maintained while suggesting partnership rather than benefactor-recipient dynamic. Bailey read it 3 times, analyzing subtext the way she'd once analyzed paintings, searching for meaning beneath surface presentation. She responded simply, "Thank you for everything. See you tomorrow." Anything more felt too revealing of the attraction building, despite every rational reason to maintain distance. Emrys inhabited a world where power and danger intertwined, where business decisions involved bomb threats and corporate assassination. Bailey's life was supposed to be ordinary struggles and modest hopes, not whatever complicated territory she'd stumbled into tonight. But as she finally climbed into impossibly soft sheets, her last conscious thought was of dark eyes that had looked at Ain with respect, and at Bailey herself with something that felt dangerously like possibility. The storm raged outside while she drifted toward sleep, unaware that the evening's events had set in motion changes that would reshape everything she thought she understood about her future. Morning arrived with crystalline brightness, winter sun reflecting off fresh snow, and flooding the suite with light that made Bailey squint against sudden brilliance. Ain was already awake, pressed against the window watching the transformed city below with wonder that made her seem exactly 7 rather than the precocious adult she'd been the previous night. The girl's resilience amazed her mother, the ability to process trauma and emerge eager for new experiences. Room service arrived with breakfast Bailey hadn't ordered, the staff explaining Mr. Colombo had arranged for comprehensive morning meal. The cart held everything from French toast to fresh fruit, clearly designed to appeal to both adult and child preferences. Ain dove into chocolate chip pancakes, while Bailey sipped coffee that tasted like it cost more than her weekly grocery budget, the casual luxury still disorienting. Her phone rang as they finished eating, Emrys's name appearing on the screen with caller ID that must have updated itself overnight. His voice carried warmth that translated even through digital connection, asking if they'd slept well and whether 10 o'clock meeting worked for reviewing foundation materials. Bailey agreed, hyper-aware of how domestic this coordination felt, like couples planning their day rather than near strangers navigating unprecedented circumstances. The foundation portfolio Marcus had provided contained testimonials from families whose children had received scholarships over the past decade. Bailey read stories remarkably similar to her own. Single parents struggling financially, children with extraordinary abilities, opportunities that transformed entire family trajectories. The documentation was thorough and transparent, tax records proving the foundation operated exactly as Emrys claimed without hidden agendas or problematic strings attached. One testimonial caught her attention particularly, a mother describing how the scholarship had not only educated her daughter but connected the family with resources addressing other challenges they faced. Medical care, housing assistance, job training. The foundation's support extended beyond academic funding to comprehensive family stabilization. The holistic approach suggested genuine understanding of how poverty complicated every aspect of existence, how isolated interventions often failed without addressing interconnected struggles. Ain played with the suite's entertainment system, her linguistic gift allowing her to navigate menus in languages the programmers never expected 7-year-olds to comprehend. She cycled through Japanese, Korean, and Arabic settings with ease, her brain treating each language as equally accessible. Bailey watched her daughter's casual brilliance, understanding how special this gift was, and how easily it could be wasted without proper cultivation. A knock at the door announced Emrys's arrival precisely at 10, his punctuality revealing military precision beneath business executive exterior. He'd brought additional materials, including Metropolitan Linguistic Academy's curriculum and faculty credentials. The school's reputation was impeccable, their approach to language acquisition combining neuroscience with traditional pedagogical methods. Several graduates had gone on to diplomatic careers and international business positions. "I spoke with the Academy's director this morning," Emrys said, as they settled in the suite sitting area, Ain coloring nearby while adults talked. "She's familiar with Ain's testing results, and extremely enthusiastic about having her in the program." His enthusiasm matched the director's genuine excitement about facilitating exceptional education. "They can begin mid-semester, if you're comfortable with that timeline, or wait until fall for traditional start." The Academy's campus occupied renovated historic building in the cultural district, its architecture blending original craftsmanship with modern educational technology. Bailey had visited yesterday during Ain's entrance assessment, watching through observation windows as linguists tested her daughter's abilities with recordings from endangered languages. Linguists barely understood themselves. Ain had processed Josa click consonants and tonal variations in Mandarin with equal facility, her brain treating each linguistic puzzle as delightful game rather than academic challenge. The assessment team had exchanged glances of professional amazement throughout the 3-hour evaluation. One particularly striking moment had involved presenting Ain with reconstructed Proto-Indo-European phrases, the theoretical ancestor language that existed before written records. The 7-year-old had listened intently to the approximated phonemes, then correctly identified structural similarities to modern Sanskrit and ancient Greek within minutes of exposure. Dr. Helena Voss, the Academy's lead researcher, had actually gasped audibly before requesting permission to publish case study on Ain's pattern recognition capabilities. Bailey had declined pending further consideration, protective instinct wary of her daughter becoming academic specimen. The Academy's student body represented 43 nationalities, children of diplomats and refugees alike, economic diversity deliberately cultivated to prevent elitist insularity. Bailey had observed students switching fluidly between languages during lunch break, conversations flowing in Tagalog, then shifting to Arabic, then French, without anyone seeming to notice the transitions. This was an environment where Ain's extraordinary abilities would be normalized rather than fetishized, where other children possessed their own remarkable talents that complemented rather than competed with linguistic genius. The social integration possibilities eased Bailey's concerns about Ain feeling isolated by her differences. Emrys had mentioned the Academy maintained partnerships with international organizations requiring multilingual expertise, providing older students with internship opportunities at United Nations assemblies and global NGO headquarters. The career pathways extended far beyond traditional academic trajectories, recognizing that linguistic gifts served practical applications in diplomacy, humanitarian work, and cultural preservation. Ain could eventually help document dying languages or facilitate peace negotiations between groups separated by communication barriers. The possibility of her abilities serving meaningful purpose rather than mere parlor trick entertainment resonated deeply with Bailey's values. The scholarship package included not just tuition, but comprehensive support services Bailey hadn't anticipated, nutritional consultation to optimize cognitive development, ergonomic assessments for study environments, even family counseling to help parents navigate raising exceptionally gifted children. The holistic approach suggested the foundation understood that supporting one aspect of a child's development, while neglecting others, created imbalanced outcomes. Bailey felt simultaneously grateful and slightly overwhelmed by the thoroughness, unaccustomed to institutions actually caring about her family's complete well-being, rather than extracting maximum value from Ain's talents. Bailey felt momentum building beyond her control, the future accelerating faster than she could process. Mid-semester meant within weeks, complete disruption of their current routine and adjustment to new reality. But waiting 6 months felt like squandering precious time when Ain's abilities needed immediate nurturing. The decision paralyzed her with its magnitude, choosing a path that would define her daughter's entire trajectory. "What concerns you most?" Emrys asked gently, reading her hesitation accurately. His perceptiveness was both comforting and unsettling, the way he saw through her surface reactions to underlying fears. Bailey found herself admitting doubts she'd barely acknowledged internally. Worry that Ain would outgrow needing her, fear that the elite school would expose how unsophisticated their life had been, anxiety about accepting help that might come with unexpected costs, despite documentation claiming otherwise. Emrys listened without interrupting, his complete attention making the admission of vulnerability feel safe rather than foolish. Parents always fear becoming obsolete as children grow, he observed quietly. My mother struggled with similar concerns when I left for university. The personal revelation surprised Bailey, offering glimpse into his family dynamics. But Ain will always need you, just differently as she develops. Your role evolves rather than diminishes. He addressed her other concerns with similar directness, explaining the Academy's deliberate socio-economic diversity and active efforts to prevent class-based hierarchies among students. The school's philosophy emphasized that intelligence and ability transcended economic circumstances, that scholarship students contributed as much value as those from wealth. Bailey wanted to believe him, to trust that Ain wouldn't face the condescension Bailey herself had encountered when her own poverty became visible. As for unexpected costs, Emrys continued, his expression serious. I understand trust issues when power differentials exist. You're right to be cautious. His honesty about the dynamic disarmed her defensive preparation. The Foundation operates with complete transparency, specifically to prevent exploitation. Third-party trustees audit everything quarterly. I can't make decisions unilaterally, even if I wanted to, and I genuinely don't want to. This isn't about control or obligation. It's simply right thing to do. Bailey examined his face for signs of deception, the micro-expressions she'd learned to read during years serving people who lied reflexively. She found only sincerity in his dark eyes, conviction that transcended mere charm. Either Emrys was masterful manipulator, or genuinely meant every word he'd said. Her instinct, honed through hard experience, suggested the latter. The realization didn't completely eliminate her wariness, but it shifted the balance toward cautious trust. I want to accept, she said slowly, testing the words as they emerged. For Ain's sake, this is incredible opportunity I'd be foolish to refuse. Bailey paused, gathering courage for the next part. But I need to contribute something beyond just accepting charity. Is there a way I can work with the Foundation? Maybe help other families navigate the process? The suggestion surprised them both, her need to maintain dignity through reciprocity making the acceptance possible. Emrys's expression shifted into something that looked remarkably like admiration. The Foundation has been trying to establish peer mentorship program, he said thoughtfully. Families who've been through the scholarship process, helping new recipients adjust. The idea clearly appealed to him, solving problem he'd been wrestling with. You'd be perfect for that role if you're interested. Modest compensation, flexible hours around Ain's schedule, meaningful work helping people in similar circumstances. The offer transformed their dynamic from patron-recipient to colleagues collaborating toward shared mission. Bailey felt the shift internally, her defensive posture relaxing into something approaching partnership. She could accept help while also providing value, maintaining the self-respect that had kept her functioning through years of struggle. The arrangement honored her dignity, while addressing her family's needs, the balance she'd needed without knowing how to articulate it. Ain looked up from her coloring, her perceptive eyes moving between her mother and Emrys, with expression that suggested she understood more than either adult realized. The girl's small smile carried approval mixed with something that looked suspiciously like matchmaking satisfaction. At 7, she'd apparently decided her mother deserved someone who treated her like equal rather than servant, and Emrys had passed whatever test children applied to adults entering their parents' life. Then we're agreed? Emrys asked, extending his hand to formalize their arrangement. Bailey shook it, feeling the now familiar calluses and strength, the spark of electricity that jumped between their palms. Their eyes held perhaps half-second too long, professional boundary blurring into territory neither was ready to acknowledge explicitly. The attraction simmered beneath practical arrangements, undeniable, but carefully unexamined. Marcus interrupted with apologetic knock, needing Emrys's signature on documents related to the previous night's investigation. The authorities had connected Chen's conspiracy to larger network of corporate mercenaries operating across 3 continents, implications that would require months of investigation to fully unravel. Emrys excused himself to handle the immediate crisis, promising to return shortly to finalize their scholarship arrangements. After he left, Ain moved to sit beside her mother on the luxurious sofa, her small hand finding Bailey's with comfort that flowed both directions. He's nice, the girl observed in her direct way that bypassed adult deflection. And he looks at you the way the prince looks at the princess in the movies before they figure out they're in love. The 7-year-old's romantic interpretation made Bailey laugh despite herself, though the observation hit closer to truth than comfortable. 3 weeks passed in whirlwind of transformation that left Bailey dizzy with disorientation and cautious hope. Ain had started at the Metropolitan Linguistic Academy, her integration so seamless the director called Bailey personally to express amazement at the girl's social adaptability alongside her intellectual gifts. The 7-year-old came home each day bubbling with stories about classmates from 12 different countries, her linguistic abilities making her the unofficial translator during international student activities. Bailey's role with the foundation began modestly, answering emails from prospective scholarship families and sharing her own experience navigating the application process. The work felt meaningful in ways her server jobs never had, helping others access opportunities that could reshape their children's futures. The modest compensation covered their basic expenses, allowing Bailey to reduce her evening shifts and actually spend time with Ain during crucial developmental years. Emrys had maintained careful professional distance over the intervening weeks, their interactions limited to foundation business and occasional updates about the investigation into Chen's conspiracy. The corporate mercenary network had proven more extensive than initially suspected, tentacles reaching into legitimate businesses across multiple industries. Authorities were building cases methodically, unwinding years of coordinated industrial espionage disguised as normal competitive practices. Bailey told herself she wasn't disappointed by Emrys's professional courtesy, that maintaining boundaries was appropriate given their power, differential, and recent acquaintance. But she found herself checking her phone too frequently for messages that rarely came, analyzing his brief emails for subtext that probably didn't exist. Ain had stopped making princess movie comparisons after the first week, her perceptive silence on the subject somehow more pointed than her earlier observations. The Foundation's quarterly board meeting fell on unseasonably warm afternoon, when early spring was asserting itself against winter's lingering grip. Bailey attended as newly appointed family liaison, her first official appearance before the trustees who governed the organization. She'd prepared thoroughly, reviewing case files and crafting presentation about peer mentorship program structure, determined to prove her value extended beyond being recipient of charity. The boardroom occupied the top floor of Emrys's corporate headquarters, floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic city views that made Bailey's stomach flutter with vertigo. 12 trustees occupied the massive conference table, successful professionals from diverse backgrounds, united by commitment to educational equity. Emrys chaired the meeting with the same controlled competence he'd displayed during the Gala crisis, his business acumen evident in how he guided discussion toward productive outcomes. Bailey's presentation went smoothly despite her nervousness, the trustees responding enthusiastically to her proposal for structured mentorship pairing experienced scholarship families with newcomers. Several trustees shared their own stories of receiving help during difficult circumstances, the personal narratives revealing that wealth often came after struggle rather than instead of it. The emotional resonance in the room suggested she'd tapped into something fundamental about human need for connection during transitions. "Exceptional work," commented Dr. Sarah Chen, a university provost whose own daughter had been early scholarship recipient. "This addresses gap we've discussed for years without finding right solution." The older woman's approval carried weight among the trustees, her educational expertise lending credibility to Bailey's grassroots insights. "I move we allocate funding to formalize this program with Ms. Bailey as director, pending her acceptance of expanded role." The trustees voted unanimously, their decision suddenly elevating Bailey from volunteer coordinator to salaried director with real organizational authority. Emrys's expression remained professionally neutral, but something flickered in his dark eyes that looked like pride mixed with deeper emotion he was carefully suppressing. The promotion was merit-based and trustee-driven, impossible to dismiss as his personal favoritism, which somehow made it mean more. After the meeting concluded, trustees lingered for refreshments and networking, their conversations covering everything from education policy to investment strategies. Bailey found herself included naturally in discussions, her insights valued rather than tolerated. Dr. Chen introduced her to several private school administrators interested in replicating the Foundation's approach, potential partnerships that could expand their impact significantly. Emrys appeared at her elbow with champagne, his proximity sending awareness tingling down her spine despite the public setting. "Congratulations, Director Bailey," he said quietly, the title carrying weight beyond professional courtesy. "You've earned this through genuine contribution rather than circumstance." The trustees saw what I recognized immediately. You have gift for understanding what families need because you've lived those challenges. Their fingers brushed as she accepted the glass. The contact brief, but electric. Bailey met his eyes and found the professional mask had slipped slightly, revealing warmth that made her breath catch. 3 weeks of careful distance evaporated in single, unguarded moment. The attraction they'd both been ignoring suddenly undeniable. The crowded boardroom prevented anything beyond that charged glance, but the acknowledgement shifted something fundamental between them. "I need to tell you something," Emrys continued, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "The investigation into Chen's network has revealed connections to my family's past that complicate the situation." His expression darkened with concern that seemed personal rather than merely professional. "My grandfather's business practices weren't always as legitimate as I believed. Some of his early competitors were eliminated through methods that would shock you." The revelation landed like cold water, reminding Bailey that Emrys inhabited a world where power came with shadowed history and moral ambiguity. Her instinct was to retreat into protective cynicism, to see this confession as proof that wealth always carried corruption. But his troubled expression suggested this knowledge disturbed him deeply, that discovering his grandfather's darker legacy challenged his entire self-understanding. The foundation was his attempt at redemption, Emrys explained, his words emerging with difficulty. When he established it 30 years ago, he was trying to balance accounts he knew could never truly be balanced. The businessman who commanded boardrooms with absolute confidence looked suddenly vulnerable, foundations of his identity revealed as less stable than assumed. "I've been continuing work built on blood money, helping children with resources stolen from other families." Bailey's response surprised them both. The foundation helps real children regardless of where the initial money came from. You can't undo your grandfather's choices, but you can determine what those resources accomplish going forward. Her working-class pragmatism cut through his wealthy guilt, offering perspective he clearly hadn't considered. Refusing to do good because the means weren't pure would just waste opportunity to create actual positive change. Emrys stared at her like she'd offered absolution he didn't know he needed, the tension in his shoulders easing fractionally. "You're remarkably forgiving for someone who has every reason to resent people like me," he observed, the barrier between them thinning further. Most would judge the entire enterprise as tainted beyond redemption. His hand moved toward hers before stopping himself, remembering they were surrounded by trustees who'd noticed such familiarity. "I'm practical," Bailey corrected gently. "Ain gets extraordinary education because your grandfather felt guilty about past actions. I can hate how the money was earned while being grateful it's now serving better purpose." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "You're not responsible for his choices, Emrys. You're only accountable for what you do with the legacy he left you. And from what I've seen, you're using it to create opportunities rather than exploitation." The use of his first name in professional context felt intimate, crossing threshold they'd both been avoiding. Emrys noticed immediately, his eyes darkening with emotion that had nothing to do with business or foundations. The air between them charged with possibility, the attraction that had simmered since the gala crystallizing into something that demanded acknowledgement despite every complication. "Doctor." Chen's approach interrupted the moment, the provost requesting Bailey's input on partnership proposal with International School Network. Emrys excused himself smoothly, but not before squeezing Bailey's hand briefly in gesture that promised conversation would continue later. She watched him navigate the room with his characteristic grace, seeing both the powerful businessman and the troubled man wrestling with inherited guilt. The rest of the meeting passed in blur of introductions and discussions, Bailey's mind only partially present while processing Emrys's revelations. She understood his confession was trust-offering, vulnerability shared in hope of deepening connection. The risk he'd taken in revealing his family's dark history suggested his interest extended well beyond professional collaboration. The realization thrilled and terrified her in equal measure. When trustees finally departed, Bailey found herself alone with Emrys in the emptying boardroom, city lights beginning to twinkle as dusk approached. The cleaning staff hadn't yet arrived, granting them privacy they'd carefully avoided for weeks. Emrys stood at the window looking out over the city his family had helped build, his posture revealing exhaustion he never showed publicly. "I'm sorry for unloading family history during what should have been your celebration," he said without turning, his reflection visible in the darkening glass. "That was unfair and poorly timed." The apology carried genuine regret, concern that he'd diminished her achievement with his own complications. His consideration for her feelings, even while wrestling with his own crisis, revealed character that transcended his intimidating exterior. Bailey moved to stand beside him at the window, their reflections nearly touching in the glass. "Your timing was fine," she assured him quietly. "And your honesty about your grandfather helps me understand you better." She watched his reflection's eyes close briefly, tension releasing from his jaw. "We all carry family legacies we didn't choose. What matters is whether we perpetuate the harm or try to heal it." Emrys turned to face her directly, the minimal distance between them suddenly feeling charged with magnetic pull. "You keep surprising me," he admitted, his voice lower than professional courtesy required. "Every time I expect judgment or rejection, you offer understanding I don't deserve." His hand lifted as though to touch her face before falling back to his side, the aborted gesture revealing internal struggle between desire and restraint. "Maybe you deserve more grace than you give yourself credit for," Bailey suggested, her own heart racing at his proximity. She could smell his cologne, something expensive and subtle that suited him perfectly. The attraction she'd been suppressing for weeks demanded acknowledgement, her body leaning toward his despite her mind's cautioning. "You're not your grandfather, Emrys. You're someone trying to do right thing with complicated inheritance." The space between them compressed to nothing, as Emrys finally surrendered to the pull that had been building since the gala. His kiss was gentle initially, asking permission rather than demanding response, giving Bailey choice to retreat if she wanted. But she didn't want retreat. She wanted this connection that felt simultaneously terrifying and inevitable, the promise of something real beneath all the complications. Bailey kissed him back with 3 weeks of suppressed longing, her hands finding his shoulders while his arms wrapped around her waist. The professional distance they'd maintained shattered completely, replaced by honesty of physical attraction and emotional connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathing unevenly, the city lights had fully emerged, and the boardroom felt like private universe containing only them. "I've wanted to do that since you defended Ain's scholarship eligibility to that skeptical trustee," Emrys confessed, his forehead resting against hers. "You were magnificent, all fierce maternal protection and righteous anger." The specific memory surprised Bailey, who'd forgotten that early foundation meeting when one trustee had questioned whether Ain's abilities were genuine. "I fell a little bit in love with you right then." That particular trustee meeting had occurred during Bailey's second week volunteering with the foundation, before her formal directorship, but after she'd begun answering family inquiries. Gerald Whitmore, a retired hedge fund manager whose donation had funded an entire scholarship wing, had suggested Ain's linguistic claims might be exaggerated parental pride rather than documented ability. His condescension had triggered something primal in Bailey, protective fury channeled through articulate dismantling of his assumptions, with evidence she'd prepared obsessively to prove her daughter's legitimacy. She'd presented neurological assessments, video documentation of Ain translating 12 languages consecutively, and testimonials from 3 independent linguistic researchers who'd tested the girl extensively. Emrys had watched that performance from his position at the table's head, his expression revealing nothing while Bailey systematically destroyed Whitmore's skepticism with facts delivered in tone that barely concealed her working-class rage at being doubted. The other trustees had shifted uncomfortably as the power dynamic inverted, this server-turned-volunteer educating the millionaire about scientific rigor and evidence-based assessment. When Bailey finished, Whitmore had actually apologized, acknowledging his assumptions had been unfounded, and praising her thorough documentation. The victory had felt significant beyond the immediate situation. What Bailey hadn't known until this moment was that Emrys had been attracted to her ferocity, that her refusal to be intimidated by wealth and status had awakened something beyond professional respect. She'd assumed he valued competence and advocacy skills, not realizing the personal dimension coloring his attention. The revelation recontextualized dozens of small interactions over subsequent weeks, moments she'd interpreted as professional mentorship, now revealing romantic interest carefully concealed beneath appropriate boundaries. His restraint had been protecting both her position and her autonomy. The memory also highlighted fundamental difference between Emrys and men Bailey had previously dated, the working-class relationships that had crumbled under financial stress and incompatible life goals. Those men had been threatened by her intelligence, dismissive of her artistic aspirations, resentful when she prioritized Ain's needs over their convenience. Emrys celebrated her strength, invested in her daughter's development, and actively created space for Bailey's deferred dreams to resurface. The contrast illuminated how much she'd settled for inadequate partnerships, because poverty convinced her she didn't deserve better. His confession also carried risk that made it meaningful, admitting attraction to employee-created potential accusation of harassment or exploitation regardless of his genuine feelings. By voicing emotions he'd carefully hidden, Emrys made himself vulnerable to rejection that could complicate their professional relationship and foundation work. The courage required to speak honestly despite those risks demonstrated commitment to authenticity over self-protection, values Bailey recognized as rare and precious in her experience with powerful men who typically prioritize their own comfort above all else. The admission hung between them, vulnerable and brave and utterly transformative. Bailey's breath caught on words she wasn't ready to say, but desperately wanted to feel. "This is complicated," she whispered, stating the obvious, because her brain couldn't form more sophisticated thought. The power difference, the foundation, Ain's scholarship. There are so many reasons this is problematic. Even as she listed obstacles, her arms remained around his neck. "I know," Emrys agreed, his hands tracing gentle patterns on her back. "Which is why I've kept distance for weeks despite wanting exactly this." He pulled back slightly to meet her eyes, his expression serious. "But I'm tired of pretending professionalism when what I feel is far more personal. If you want me to maintain boundaries, I will absolutely respect that. But if there's any chance you feel something similar, I'd like to explore what this could be." Bailey's practical nature warred with her yearning heart, the debate lasting perhaps 5 seconds before her heart won decisively. "I feel it too," she admitted, the confession feeling like stepping off cliff into unknown territory. "I've been telling myself all the reasons it's impossible while checking my phone, constantly hoping for messages from you." The honesty felt liberating, releasing pressure that had built from weeks of pretending. They kissed again, longer and deeper, communicating everything words couldn't express about desire and hope and tentative trust. When Emrys's phone buzzed insistently in his pocket, they broke apart reluctantly, the outside world intruding on their private moment. He checked the screen with visible irritation before his expression shifted to concern. "Marcus needs me. There's been development in the investigation that requires immediate attention." Bailey understood this would be their reality, moments stolen between crises, romance competing with business emergencies and security threats. The life Emrys led didn't allow for simple courtship rituals or uncomplicated dating. She could either accept that complexity or walk away now before becoming more entangled. The choice should have been difficult, but looking at his worried face, she knew she'd already decided. "Go handle whatever it is," she said, straightening his collar with intimate familiarity that felt natural, despite their newness. "But Emrys, this conversation isn't finished. We need to figure out how this works without compromising the foundation or making things weird for Ain." Her insistence on practical discussion, even in romantic context, made him smile, that rare, unguarded expression she was learning to treasure. "Dinner tomorrow," he requested, stealing one more quick kiss. "Somewhere private where we can talk without interruption. I'll have Marcus arrange security so we're not photographed. Keep it quiet until we understand what this is ourselves." The consideration for her privacy, the acknowledgement that publicity could complicate her life, demonstrated thoughtfulness that went beyond grand gestures to meaningful details. After he left, Bailey remained in the boardroom processing the evening's rapid emotional progression. She'd arrived as nervous new employee and was leaving as director with explicit romantic interest from the foundation's chairman. The transformation felt surreal, like someone else's fairy tale rather than her working-class reality. But the lingering warmth of Emrys's kiss was undeniably real, physical proof that impossibility could sometimes become truth. Her phone buzzed with text from Ain's after-school program, confirming pickup time, the mundane parental responsibility grounding her in practical reality. Bailey had daughter to collect, homework to supervise, normal life to maintain even as everything else shifted around her. The balance between new romance and maternal duty would require careful navigation, ensuring Ain's stability remained priority regardless of Bailey's personal desires. The next afternoon brought promised dinner at Emrys's private residence, a penthouse apartment Bailey hadn't known existed above his corporate offices. Marcus had indeed arranged discreet transportation, the security chief's knowing smile suggesting he thoroughly approved of this development. The apartment reflected Emrys's taste, modern lines softened with comfortable furniture, art collection displayed with museum-quality lighting, space that felt lived in rather than showpiece. Emrys had cooked personally, Italian dishes his grandmother had taught him, the domestic gesture more intimate than any restaurant reservation. They ate on his terrace overlooking the city, spring evening mild enough for outdoor dining. The conversation flowed naturally between serious discussion of relationship parameters and lighter exchanges about childhood memories and future hopes. Bailey found herself relaxing into possibilities she'd thought permanently beyond her reach. I want to be completely transparent about what dating me means, Emrys said over dessert, his expression grave. There will be security considerations, background checks on anyone in my inner circle, media interest if we become public. My business attracts enemies who might see you or Ain as leverage. The warning was fair, but sobering, reminder that his world carried genuine dangers beyond emotional risk. Bailey appreciated his honesty, even as the implications settled heavy in her stomach. Ain's safety is non-negotiable, she stated firmly, her maternal instinct overriding romantic possibility. If being with you puts her at risk, I can't do this regardless of how I feel. The ultimatum emerged clearly, establishing boundaries she wouldn't compromise. Her daughter's well-being trumped everything, even love that was beginning to feel inevitable. I would never ask you to choose between us, Emrys assured her immediately. Ain's security becomes my priority the moment you agree to this relationship. Marcus is already developing protection protocols that are invisible to her daily life, but effective against any threats. His preparation revealed he'd been planning for this conversation, thinking through logistics before pursuing romance. Your daughter saved my life. Protecting hers is both obligation and honor. The promise settled something fundamental in Bailey's chest, allowing her to breathe fully for the first time since his warning about dangers. She believed him completely, saw in his eyes that he meant every word about safeguarding Ain. The commitment he offered extended beyond romantic partnership to encompass her entire family, the package deal she and her daughter represented. He wasn't asking her to compartmentalize motherhood from relationship, but embracing both. Then let's try this, Bailey decided, reaching across the table to take his hand. Carefully, privately at first, but genuinely. I want to see where this goes without pretending it's not happening. The decision felt simultaneously reckless and right, leap of faith into unknown territory with someone who'd proven himself trustworthy. But we tell Ain truthfully when the time comes. No deception, no pretending you're just my boss. The conversation about telling Ain had occurred 3 days after that decisive dinner, both of them nervous about how a 7-year-old would process her mother dating the man whose foundation funded her education. They'd planned the discussion carefully, choosing casual setting of weekend breakfast at Bailey's modest apartment, rather than Emrys's intimidating penthouse. Ain had been flipping pancakes with concentration that furrowed her small brow when Emrys arrived with fresh strawberries and genuine anxiety about the impending revelation. His hands had actually trembled slightly arranging fruit on plates, this man who negotiated million-dollar contracts, showing nerves about a child's approval. Ain's reaction had bypassed all their careful preparation, the girl looking up from her pancakes and asking directly whether they were boyfriend and girlfriend now. When they'd confirmed somewhat awkwardly, she'd nodded with satisfaction and returned to her cooking, declaring she'd been wondering when they'd figure it out, since it was super obvious they liked each other. Her matter-of-fact acceptance had deflated their anxiety like punctured balloon. The elaborate explanations they'd rehearsed rendered unnecessary by childhood's refreshing directness. She'd had only one question. Would Emrys be coming to her school concert next week? That concert had been Emrys's first public appearance as Bailey's partner rather than foundation chairman, sitting in auditorium's parent section while Ain performed multilingual songs with her classmates. He'd held Bailey's hand openly throughout the performance, no longer maintaining professional distance that had characterized their interactions at foundation events. Other parents had noticed, whispers circulating about the wealthy businessman dating the scholarship student's mother, but the gossip had been more curious than malicious. Ain had beamed seeing them together in the audience, her happiness validating their decision to pursue relationship despite complications. The Foundation's board had been informed shortly thereafter, through formal notification from Emrys about relationship that might constitute conflict of interest, requiring recusal from decisions involving Bailey's employment or Ain's scholarship. Dr. Chen had laughed, apparently having suspected romantic connection for weeks based on how they looked at each other during meetings. The other trustees had responded pragmatically, establishing oversight protocols ensuring Bailey's directorship remained merit-based, and Ain's scholarship continued regardless of romantic relationships' outcome. The professional handling of personal situation had reinforced Foundation's legitimate operations, rather than raising concerns about favoritism. Marcus had been least surprised of anyone, the security chief admitting he'd begun developing relationship contingency plans the night of the gala, when Emrys had first shown personal interest beyond professional gratitude. His protective protocols had already accounted for Bailey and Ain becoming part of Emrys's inner circle, threat assessments updated to include them as potential leverage points against his employer. The revelation that they'd been under subtle security observation for months should have felt invasive, but Marcus's genuine concern for their safety made it feel protective rather than controlling. He'd even started teaching Ain basic situational awareness disguised as games during their occasional interactions. Emrys's smile transformed his entire face, joy breaking through his usual controlled expression. Agreed completely. Ain's too perceptive for deception anyway. She'd see through any attempt at hiding this. He stood and pulled Bailey to her feet, drawing her close for a kiss that sealed their agreement. The city sparkled below them, spring night promising renewal and new beginnings. Whatever complications lay ahead, they'd face them together with honesty and intention. 6 months transformed what had seemed impossible into comfortable reality, the rhythm of their unconventional relationship settling into pattern that accommodated business demands and parental responsibilities. Ain had welcomed news of her mother dating Emrys, with 7-year-old's direct enthusiasm, declaring she'd known they liked each other from the beginning. The girl's easy acceptance had smoothed transition that might otherwise have been awkward, her excitement about Emrys becoming regular presence eliminating any sense of intrusion. The Foundation's peer mentorship program had expanded beyond Bailey's initial proposal, now serving 40 families across 3 cities with plans for national scaling. Her directorship had proven exactly right fit, combining her lived experience with natural empathy and organizational skills she hadn't known she possessed. Professional success, independent of her relationship with Emrys, reinforced that her value extended beyond romantic connection. Achievement earned rather than granted. Ain thrived at the academy, her linguistic abilities developing in directions even the specialists hadn't anticipated. She'd begun creating new languages, grammatical structures that combined elements from multiple linguistic families in ways that fascinated cognitive scientists. The girl's teachers predicted she'd eventually work in diplomatic circles or international intelligence, her gifts too extraordinary for conventional career paths. Bailey worried occasionally about her daughter's future in worlds that might try to weaponize her abilities. Emrys had proven remarkably patient with Ain's presence in their relationship, including her in activities without treating her like obstacle to adult romance. He'd taken them both to art museums, explaining his collection's history while encouraging Ain to practice describing paintings in different languages. The 3 of them had developed their own traditions. Sunday morning breakfast preparations where everyone contributed dishes, movie nights where Ain selected films in foreign languages and provided running translation. The investigation into his grandfather's legacy had concluded with mixture of vindication and disappointment. The old man's early business practices had indeed involved coercion and intimidation, but nothing reaching the criminal level Emrys had feared. The revelation that his family's wealth was built on aggressive competition, rather than outright theft, had provided some comfort while confirming his instinct to use that wealth redemptively. He'd established additional scholarship programs, specifically in communities his grandfather's business had displaced. The displaced communities had been predominantly immigrant neighborhoods, where his grandfather's industrial expansion had forced residential relocations through aggressive property acquisition and political pressure. Reading the historical documents, Emrys had discovered families given minimal compensation for homes their grandparents had built, entire cultural enclaves scattered when factories replaced residential blocks. The economic development had created jobs but destroyed social fabric, trading community cohesion for employment opportunities that primarily benefited subsequent generations rather than those who'd sacrificed their neighborhoods. The moral complexity of that exchange haunted him. His response had been establishing targeted scholarship programs prioritizing descendants of those displaced families, attempting genealogical reparation across 3 generations. The Foundation's research team had tracked family lines through property records and immigration documentation, identifying current students whose great-grandparents had lost homes to Colombo industrial expansion. Bailey had helped design outreach specifically addressing these families, understanding from her own working-class experience how historical grievances created justified skepticism about wealthy institutions suddenly offering assistance. The program had enrolled its first cohort last month, 23 students whose ancestry connected directly to his grandfather's business practices. One student, 16-year-old Maria Santos, had confronted Emrys during the scholarship ceremony with a letter her great-grandmother had written before dying, describing the heartbreak of watching their neighborhood demolished for factories that never hired the displaced residents. Maria had read the letter aloud in front of assembled families and trustees, her voice carrying 3 generations of pain, that no scholarship could fully address. Emrys had listened without defending or deflecting, accepting the anger as rightfully earned. His only response had been acknowledging that no amount of educational funding could undo historical harm, but perhaps it could prevent similar injustices in futures these students would shape. The confrontation had been filmed by local media covering the scholarship ceremony, the footage going viral as example of accountability meeting, grievance with humility rather than dismissal. Public response had split predictably along ideological lines, some praising Emrys's acknowledgement of inherited privileges' costs, others criticizing him for accepting blame for actions predating his birth. Bailey had watched him navigate the controversy with grace that deepened her respect, refusing to center his own discomfort when discussing others' legitimate pain. He'd used the attention to platform Maria's voice, arranging interviews where she could discuss immigrant community displacement and ongoing gentrification concerns. The experience had also revealed Emrys's capacity for growth beyond his privileged background, his willingness to be educated by people his grandfather's business had harmed, rather than assuming his wealth granted him superior understanding. Bailey watched him attend community meetings in the affected neighborhoods, listening more than speaking, learning the ongoing consequences of historical decisions. His humility in those spaces, the absence of savior complex that afflicted many wealthy philanthropists, demonstrated character that transcended performance. These were private actions he never publicized, genuine attempts at understanding rather than reputation management. Bailey's art had resurged in unexpected ways, her directorship allowing financial stability that permitted return to painting. Emrys had converted spare room in his penthouse into studio for her use, the gesture both practical and symbolic of how he valued her identity beyond their relationship. Her watercolors had improved through consistent practice, several pieces now hanging in the foundation's offices. Dr. Chen had connected her with gallery owner interested in showing work by emerging artists. Their relationship had become semi-public knowledge, carefully managed revelation that generated less controversy than Bailey had feared. Emrys's reputation for integrity and the foundation's transparent operations made their romance seem natural extension of shared values rather than scandalous power imbalance. Media coverage had been largely positive, highlighting Bailey's professional competence alongside the fairy tale elements that made good human interest stories. Marcus had become unexpected ally in navigating security concerns. His protective detail so subtle, Ain remained unaware of constant surveillance. The girl's safety had never been compromised, though 2 attempts by rival corporate interests to gather information about Emrys through Bailey had been quietly intercepted and neutralized. The security chief treated both Bailey and Ain with genuine affection, his military exterior concealing soft spot for the family who'd disrupted his employer's careful isolation. Tonight marked the Foundation's annual gala, the same event that had brought them together 6 months prior under such dramatic circumstances. Bailey arrived in borrowed designer gown, Emrys's gift for the occasion, feeling simultaneously sophisticated and like imposter playing dress-up. But his expression when he saw her, unguarded admiration mixed with possessive pride, made her feel genuinely beautiful, rather than costumed. Ain accompanied them in age-appropriate formal dress, excited to see the ballroom transformed again. The evening progressed smoothly, free from assassination attempts or bomb threats, merely elegant celebration of the Foundation's expanding impact. Bailey mingled with trustees and donors as comfortable equal rather than anxious outsider, her professional credibility established through 6 months of excellent work. Scholarship recipients attended with their families, living proof of the program's success, their stories more persuasive than any statistics about educational outcomes. Emrys took the podium for his annual remarks, his speech focusing on gratitude toward the families and children who trusted the Foundation with their futures. He acknowledged Bailey by name, crediting her mentorship program with dramatically improving family retention and satisfaction. The recognition was professional and appropriate, but his eyes found hers in the crowd, with warmth that transcended business acknowledgement. Several trustees smiled knowingly at the exchange. During dancing portion of the evening, Emrys claimed Bailey for waltz that felt like public claiming of their relationship. They'd kept physical affection minimal at Foundation events, maintaining professional boundaries even as their personal relationship deepened. But tonight, holding her close while orchestra played, he seemed unconcerned about observers. The shift suggested comfort with their situation, evolving from private secret to acknowledged partnership. "I want to ask you something," Emrys murmured as they swayed to music, his breath warm against her ear. "And I want you to know there's no pressure. You can take time to consider or refuse entirely without affecting anything else." The preamble made Bailey's heart accelerate, recognizing significant question was coming. She nodded permission for him to continue, trusting his consideration for her autonomy. "Move in with me," he requested quietly, the words simple but weighted with enormous implications. "You and Ain both, not because of finances or convenience, but because I want to build life with you. And that starts with sharing space." His arms tightened fractionally around her waist. "I've converted the second guest room into perfect space for Ain, but only if she's comfortable. If you both prefer maintaining your apartment, I understand completely." Bailey's mind raced through implications: loss of independence, increased visibility, Ain's adjustment to new home, the message cohabitation sent about their relationship's seriousness. But she also considered the practical benefits, the emotional rightness of waking beside him daily, the family unit they'd already become in everything but living arrangements. Her apartment lease ended next month, timing that felt like universe offering gentle push toward decision. "Let me discuss it with Ain," Bailey temporized, needing her daughter's input before committing to change that affected them both. "If she's comfortable with the idea, then yes, I'd like that very much." The qualification protected Ain's voice in decisions while revealing Bailey's own desire. Emrys's expression brightened with hope, tempered by respect for her maternal priority, his understanding of family dynamics deepening their connection. The dance ended with applause as orchestra concluded their set, couples dispersing toward refreshment tables and conversation clusters. Ain appeared at their side, her small face animated with excitement about dessert selection she'd been eyeing. The girl's presence grounded them both in the reality they were building, the family forming from unlikely circumstances and genuine affection. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they'd face them as unit rather than individuals. Later that evening, after Ain had fallen asleep in car ride home, Bailey watched city lights stream past, while Emrys drove with casual competence. 6 months ago, she'd been struggling server, bringing her daughter to work from necessity. Tonight, she'd attended the same gala as director and partner, to the man who'd recognized her worth immediately. The transformation felt miraculous, yet somehow inevitable, as though every hardship had been preparing her for this precise moment. "Thank you," she said quietly, the words inadequate for everything she meant. Emrys glanced at her with questioning expression, his hand finding hers on the console between their seats. "For seeing me and Ain as people rather than charity cases. For building something real instead of just playing generous benefactor. For being patient with my defenses and worthy of trust when I finally lowered them." His fingers laced through hers, squeezing gently in acknowledgement and reciprocation. "Thank you for saving my life in more ways than preventing poisoning," he countered, his voice rough with emotion. "You and Ain gave me purpose beyond building corporate empires and managing inherited guilt. You showed me that legacy can be love instead of burden, that family can be chosen with same bonds as blood." The vulnerability in his admission revealed depth of feeling that transcended early romance. Bailey leaned across the console to kiss his cheek, the gesture affectionate rather than passionate, partnership rather than infatuation. They'd built something solid on foundation of mutual respect and shared values, romance that could sustain beyond initial attraction. Whatever future held, they'd face it together with honesty and intention. The 7-year-old girl sleeping peacefully in back seat had changed everything with single whispered warning, setting in motion transformation that rescued them all from smaller lives they'd been settling for. The city sparkled around them. Winter snow long melted into spring renewal, summer promising warmth ahead. New constellations were forming, family patterns emerging from individual stars finding orbit around each other. The story that began with Child's extraordinary courage was becoming something larger. Legacy of love built on foundation of second chances and chosen family. And that, Bailey thought as Emrys pulled into his building's secured parking, was better than any fairy tale could promise. Thank you all for following this story. If you enjoyed it, write in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. Your support means everything, and helps me continue bringing you more stories like this one.